What is up, everybody? This is Nick from P2W Fantasy. And after several rep meetings, some podcast contract discussions, and some luck, I have two great guests on the pod at the same time this week that I've been super excited about. So I have John Bauer and Jacob Dunn both together tonight. So I figured before we jump into things here, I got to introduce the guests and make sure that they get to talk about everything they have going on, because these are two very busy guys with great fantasy content. So to start things off, got John Bauer, host of the Dynasty Theory FF, and also with Fantasy Football Confidential. So, John, super active on Twitter. Every time you're live, I like to click on that link and listen to you guys all talk. You got two great shows. Can you just tell everybody where we can find you? Because this is going to go out on iTunes and all that good stuff after today. But where can we find you? And why don't you give us some insight on what you got going on?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, Nick, thank you so much for having me. So like you said, I'm John Bauer. You can find me on Twitter at the Bauer Club. I am one of the hosts of Dynasty Theory. That's at Dynasty Theory FF, and Fantasy Football Confidential at FF_confidential. Both of those on Twitter and Instagram. And then for Dynasty Theory, we actually just kicked off the Patreon today. A lot of great content. We have the Discord chat. Great conversations going on in there pretty much nonstop since we kicked it off. So I'm super excited about that. But like you said, Nick, I'm super active on Twitter. Anybody that I have connected with, reach out to me, DM me. I'm always up for some discussions about fantasy football.
Awesome. Yeah, I constantly am trying to share your stuff when it drops out, just because you can always count on consistent, good material, whether it's just a simple tweet or a live stream or whatever else you got going on at the time. So always great content from you, as well as my guy, Jacob Dunn. Jacob is a guy I talk to on a daily basis, pretty much. You got a lot of things going on. Talk Prime Time, New Life Fantasy, Fantasy Six Pack. You have the Mile High Salute podcast. And what I like to see almost every other week is you being one of the top rankers on Fantasy Pros. And I always boost you for that. I'm like your hype man. So Jacob, can you tell us what you got going on, where we can find you, all that good stuff?
I appreciate that, Nick. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Ain't Done Yet, and Done is spelled Dunne. And, I put out a weekly streamers article. I put out the weekly rankings, which you said, like, I've had some luck with the Fantasy Pros rankings this year. I mean, it takes a lot of work to put into your rankings, but a lot of luck goes into it. I mean, who knows what's going to happen on a week-to-week basis, but luck always favors the prepared. I always say that. So if you want streamers, if you want articles, and if you want the occasional Broncos preview, because I am in Denver and now I'm forced to keep writing that even though we have no shot at the playoffs, I would love for you guys to follow me and just to DM me and, do whatever.
Awesome. So again, two great guests that I'm a big fan of for sure. So what we got going on today, talking a little bit about Week 12, and also just some fantasy questions in general. I thought it'd be appropriate if I have both of you guys on at the same time. I have to take advantage of that and just spit out as many questions to you guys as possible. So I really thought about some good topics that could apply to redraft, some 2020 talk, some dynasty, just a lot of different things, all obviously related to fantasy football. So to kick things off, looking back to Week 12, a lot of different news dropped. Some big surprises of the week. I get nervous sometimes when my sleeper app goes off because I don't know if it's going to be good news, bad news, or what the case is going to be. But looking back to Week 12, if you had to give us one surprise of the week, what would that be and why? And we'll start off with John. What was one surprise of Week 12 for you?
I laughed whenever I saw these show notes because on Fantasy Football Confidential and Dynasty Theory, my co-host can tell you, I can never limit something to just one. So I have a whole list here, but I am going to throw just one.
Okay,
and
all right.
It actually came after, technically we're still in Week 12, but it was the Will Fuller suspension. And I know we're going to get to, I was laughing at one of the questions that you had because it related to Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks. And I was like,
I had to adjust that one. Yeah.
Yep. And that's kind of the state of fantasy football that we're in, constantly changing and moving on the fly here. But just the fallout there in Houston, not only does it impact Will Fuller, obviously, on a contract year, is he going to get extended? How is that going to play into how much money he's going to be making moving forward? But then the splits that you see with Deshaun Watson, and he is not as effective and efficient when Will Fuller is not on the field. So I do think there's just so many fantasy implications. Brandon Cooks, obviously, I think he's going to get a higher target share, but how is that going to impact with him being back to a number one in that offense? They just cut Kenny Stills, so they're really hurting at wide receiver. Do they include more of the tight ends in their schemes and packages? Does Duke Johnson, do we finally see him get more involved in the passing game? We saw it a little bit on Thanksgiving, but I'm really intrigued to see how that one plays out, because Will Fuller, he was a bona fide one for fantasy purposes, and it's going to leave a huge hole in that offense.
Yeah, and it is going to be interesting to see what that domino effect looks like, because just listening to some other opinions, some people think maybe Jordan Atkins will take a little bit of a leap here in the tight end position. Will, Kiki Kuti, who popped out of nowhere, he was a name in the past that people were excited about, that dropped out of fantasy relevance, and now he has an opportunity to get some more targets. They have that rookie Isaiah Coulter, so there's a lot of different routes that this team can go, and seeing Watson have back-to-back 30-plus weeks, it's kind of a hit for his manager, just a little bit, just because he loses such a great weapon that he's had through the season. And Will Fuller dropping out of our fantasy season here, not due to an injury, was a definite big surprise there. So, Jacob, you have any comments on the Will Fuller news there?
I don't know about you guys, but when I heard this news, I was like, well, that explains why he hasn't gotten hurt at all this year. I mean, his hamstrings are made of glass. And I was like, that explains a ton. I mean, I respected the Instagram apology, but I was, it's tough to say whether he was honest or not. And I am not one to question a man's integrity, but I mean, those hamstrings, like, they get pulled at least like 5 times a year, and they weren't pulled once. So we saw what he was capable of when he's fully healthy, but man, it took some extra stuff for him to stay healthy. So hopefully, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but I always want to give players the benefit of the doubt. But then the very next day, Roby, the defensive back there in Houston, he gets a 6-game suspension. So it's like, did he go to the same doctor and he wasn't aware? What's going on here? And then I saw some tweets that Brian Cushing, he's one of the strength and conditioning coaches,
former player.
Yeah, and I think he was busted for PEDs. So it's like, okay, what else is going on here? So I don't know. Like you said, I don't want to, if somebody's lying here, but it doesn't look great.
Right.
So Jacob, what surprised you from week 12?
One thing that surprised me was Stephon Diggs. I mean, I had him as a top 5 wide receiver going into this week, because I thought the Chargers and Bills game was going to be a shootout with Herbert and Josh Allen. I thought this game was just going to be fireworks, and he didn't record a single catch until the third quarter, and he technically wasn't targeted until the third quarter. So he did end up with 7 catches, but he barely averaged over 5 yards per catch. And, again, in a game where I had him top 5 and this was going to be fireworks, for him to just average 5 yards per catch, that was a huge letdown for my fantasy teams, one, my rankings, two, and just for all of the fantasy world who started him and had high hopes for him.
Yeah, the funny thing with the Diggs stat line is that I knew about it at halftime, not just from me checking my phone. We had a busy day. My brother got engaged this past Sunday, so we had this big plan for that. So I wasn't in tune as much as I usually am with all the stat lines and things like that. But my wife has some similar players, ironically or not ironically, than I do in some leagues. So she actually was the one that nudged me and said, guess what Stephon Diggs has right now? 0. And she gave me one of those looks, because I was probably at one time a guy that said, hey, you should draft him. So yeah, that was surprising as well too. I mean, he finished the game with 7 catches, not a ton, 39 yards.
Right.
But for a while, it took him a little bit longer than we wanted to get into that game for sure.
Right.
Man, we got Mendy popping in here. Wow, I'm starstruck with this group.
Oh, Mendy.
Yeah, Mendy. What a great guy.
Love that guy.
Huge week for Tyreek Hill. I had a little bit of a trivia question for you guys here. So Tyreek Hill scored 57.9 PPR points this past week. He had the 3 touchdowns. Again, into the game, it was the first quarter, and my brother got engaged. Said, guess what Tyreek Hill has right now? And I said 10. And he said higher. And I just kept going, and I was just shook that he had that amount of points in the first quarter. So he had 57.9. Can you guys name, off the top of your head, guys who have scored 40-plus in a week this season? And if you want to just spitfire out some names.
I'm going to go DK Metcalf.
So DK Metcalf, week 8, 40.1. So that's one of them.
Yeah.
Tyler Lockett.
Yeah.
Yep. Tyler Lockett was one as well.
Oh.
I won't make you have all of them. Maybe we can get
Fuller
2
one?
each.
Was Will Fuller one?
Ooh. Last week, probably, huh?
Will Fuller, I think, was in the 35 range, around there. But it looks like Tyreek Hill was the season high, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And was Dalvin Cook up there?
Dalvin Cook, week 8, 48.6.
Nice.
Jacob, can you give us one more guess?
I'm going to go with oh, man, this is tough. This is a non-quarterback, right?
Yes, all non-quarterbacks.
I'm just going to take a guess. I'm going to go with Alvin Kamara.
Good answer. I feel like we're on Family Feud. Good answer.
Thanks, man.
Good answer. Week 3.
Thanks.
Week 3. Alvin Kamara, week 3. You're right. Other guys, Derrick Henry, Chase Claypool, Joe Mixon, George Kittle, and Devontae Adams, or some other names that scored 40-plus. But just looking at the weekly highs, I had to jot down some notes on that.
Dang.
So going into the next topic here. So I gave you guys 2 guys, but then I feel like I was discrediting a couple guys here. So I'm going to read you guys off some of the rookie wide receivers, and you tell me who finishes the year as your rookie wide receiver 1. So based off of this year's performance, maybe not necessarily dynasty. So originally I said T. Higgins or Justin Jefferson. I also threw in CeeDee Lamb and Claypool just because of performances and where they stand for the position. So T. Higgins, wide receiver 26, he's averaging 13.3, 5 touchdowns on the year. He's had weeks where he scored 21, 18.7, 18.8, 22.5, 15.4. He only had 3 games under 10 points. Justin Jefferson's the wide receiver 12 right now, averaging 16.5. He's got 6 touchdowns. He's had 2 weeks above 30, almost hit that 40 mark. 21.5, 17.6, and 26. He does have 5 games this season under 10 points, though. CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver 24. He has an average of 13.3. He's had a few weeks above 20, one at 17.5, 16.6, 3 weeks under 10. And then the last guy I got on this list, Chase Claypool, wide receiver 22, 10 total touchdowns, averaging 15.5 points. He's had that 42.6 week from that list we just mentioned. He's had a few weeks at 15, and then he's had a 21.3 point week. He's been 3 weeks under 10. So a lot of stats, a lot of notes there on those guys. For you, when the season ends, so in a few weeks here, who will you say is the wide receiver 1 of 2020, the rookie season? Jacob, we'll start with you on this one.
I'm going to go with Justin Jefferson, and it's really not that close for me because all those other wideouts, CeeDee Lamb and T. Higgins, they just lost their starting quarterback, or CeeDee Lamb hasn't had his for weeks now. Now, I'm bummed because it's like if all those rookie wideouts had a steady, consistent quarterback, even Jerry Jeudy, if he would have had Drew Lock all season, perhaps he would even have better stats. But it's Justin Jefferson and Claypool for me, just because they have a steady, elite quarterback. I mean, Kirk Cousins isn't elite, but I mean, at least he knows how to get him the ball and the ball consistently. So I'm going with Justin Jefferson just because, you know, he was touted in the offseason to be the heir apparent to Stephon Diggs. And I thought that was outlandish. But he's proving to be, if not as good, maybe a little bit better. I mean, he is a monster, and his route running is almost as good as Jerry Jeudy. So I'm going to go with Justin Jefferson here.
Anthony's chiming in here at the big 3. I don't know if you can say that about me in the picture there, but these two for sure.
Absolutely, you
But
can.
yeah, Justin Jefferson definitely having a massive year, especially on those weeks where he's probably winning you your matchup when he's scoring those 30+ point weeks. But it was funny, going into the year though, that there were some people that were buying into the BC Johnson camp talk, and that was just outrageous to me. But John, are you in agreement, or do you have somebody else in mind?
I wish I could mix it up here, but I also am going with Justin Jefferson. And just like you guys mentioned, there were some people that were a little skeptical of Justin Jefferson coming in, whether it's BC Johnson or the amount of 12 personnel the Minnesota Vikings run. And we know that Justin Jefferson excelled out of the slot, but what happens when he's pushed out wide? Even though he did run out wide, a little bit there in college. But T. Higgins has been super impressive. CeeDee Lamb, I don't know if we are having this conversation if Dak Prescott is still playing. I think it would be maybe Jefferson 2, CeeDee Lamb 1. But what really makes it that impressive for me for Justin Jefferson, the Vikings throw the ball about 30 times per game. The Bengals and Cowboys, they're up to about 45 times per game. So that makes it super impressive for me. And then you mentioned the other guys, Claypool, even Brandon Ayuk, Jerry Jeudy. They've had their moments, but just overall, I have to go Justin Jefferson. It's been extremely impressive. He's been able to perform with Thielen in the lineup and without him in the lineup. He's not one of those players where you're going to sit there and wonder, can he be a one in an offense? Because we hear it all the time, right? We heard about Juju Smith-Schuster in Pittsburgh. And, I think Justin Jefferson, that question can be put to bed. He can be a wide receiver one, and he's a top 10 dynasty receiver. Lamb, I think he's there too. And Higgins, he's top 15 for me. I think this class, it's so funny because coming in, the talk was all about the running backs. Everybody wanted those high-end running backs, but it's the wide receivers that have really been showing out this season. It's been super impressive. One of the best classes we've ever had from top to bottom. And, you could mention 6-7 guys here that we should be extremely excited about. But yeah, Jacob stole my answer. I'm going Justin Jefferson.
It's a good answer.
Yeah. Good. Again, with the Family Feud, good answer. But I think it's hard to debate that right now. There's been so many different factors that have come into play with some of these guys, like you mentioned before, Jacob, with CeeDee Lamb. We thought right away he was going to be the wide receiver one for this class based off of some early performances, but he has that asterisk now with Dalton. And then Jerry Jeudy, Jacob, I know that's a guy you and I have talked about so much coming into the year. But looking at his situation now, the volume's not where it needs to be at times. And we're actually going to talk about Denver here into our next topic. So, again, if you're tuning in, we're just spitting out different questions and different sort of topics. I think it makes for a fun podcast that way because there's so much to talk about. And we're looking ahead and we're looking now. But with this past week, especially with you being on the podcast, Jacob, I have to throw this question out there. The situation with Denver in week 12. So from a fantasy perspective, Brandon McManus, had to spit that one out. Brandon McManus had 5 points. Royce Freeman also had 5. Melvin Gordon had 3.1. Noah Fant had 2.3. Philip Lindsay had 2, and everybody else had 0 or negative. They didn't really play with the quarterback in this game. So with not being able to play one of their 3 or 4, I believe, quarterbacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that, and we'll start with you, Jacob, do you think that the league approached this situation the correct way?
I mean, this was very strange. Even though I live in Broncos country, I do a podcast for the Broncos. I feel like I'm supposed to be mad that they didn't postpone it or they didn't make some special, rescheduling. But, I don't believe there could have been a better way to handle it, considering that the Broncos were already forced into a bye week earlier in the season, thanks to Cam Newton getting it. So there really wasn't any room for error. Since it was just the quarterbacks who got COVID, I kind of believe the league saw it as justice to play the game anyways, since they were all reportedly not wearing masks. So it sucks, but given the weird year, it is what it is.
Any thoughts, JB?
Well, whenever I saw that news, first of all, did anybody ever think we would be missing even Blake Bortles as a quarterback? Like,
Right.
please get Blake in there somehow. But
Right.
as soon as I saw that news, instantly I went through all of my lineups. And this season, because it's been so chaotic, I have been spending countless hours, yes, hours, adjusting my lineups with every piece of news that comes out. But I dropped Noah Fant out. I dropped Jerry Jeudy if I had him, Melvin Gordon, Philip Lindsay. If I had any other option, any player that was going to be on a field for any of the teams that were playing this weekend, I was throwing them in there. But I think they handled it as well as they could have, and I had no issue with it up to that point.
Yeah.
But then and I know people are comparing it to the Baltimore situation where it is completely different because, and for Denver, and Jacob, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was only the one positive test. I don't even think the other quarterbacks tested positive, but because they were close contacts, right?
Right. Exactly. It was too soon. Yeah.
So for Baltimore, obviously it was an outbreak. You have 20 plus players and personnel, and I have no issue with them pushing that Thursday game to Monday, then Tuesday, then Wednesday. My issue is, why is that Baltimore Dallas game getting pushed back to Tuesday when the Steelers still play next Monday? That doesn't make sense to me. And coincidentally, it ties out to Lamar Jackson coming back. That is the 10th day, I think, for him. So I just think it's a little too coincidental. And I'm not going to sit here and say it's a conspiracy. And yes, I am in Pittsburgh, but I always say that my heart lives and breathes and dies with my fantasy teams, even ahead of my Steelers. But I just think it's too coincidental that the day that Lamar Jackson can come back, that's when that game gets pushed to. And I haven't seen an explanation. I know the explanation we got for tomorrow is because the Christmas tree is getting lit at night, so that's why the game's early. And I thought that was kind of funny. But if they push that Denver game back one day, could the quarterbacks have played? I don't really know how the protocol was there, or if it took X amount of days. I'm not sure, but that's kind of what made me raise my eyebrows. Otherwise, I thought, like you said, Jacob, it is what it is. And then as fantasy owners, we know the risk associated with playing these players in situations, looking at Baltimore, Pittsburgh, just because of the risk there, I pulled all of them out of my lineup too. If I'd been Juju, whoever, they were sitting this week for me. But yeah, I mean, it definitely makes for an interesting season. And I joke, if this was your first year playing fantasy football, you're probably like, I'm never playing again. No, I'm
right. I quit.
Yeah. We talked about the Baltimore situation in just one of my league group chat, and we just thought it was weird how specific the situation in Denver was, where it was the quarterbacks in a meeting, they didn't wear masks, and it just came out, they admitted it, and Fangio came out and he was disappointed about the whole thing. But then you go to the Ravens and everything's very hush-hush. Like, how did this outbreak spread within the clubhouse? Like, did they break some sort of protocol? And there was tweets that came out about, what the actual league protocol was and the regulations with that, and that, Denver might have buried themselves in that situation. But it's just so funny to see how one team, it's so specific, the next team, you don't hear anything. The situations are different, but it's such a weird year, like you guys are saying, where almost on a weekly basis, I'm with you, JB. I spend way too much time setting and changing and adjusting and reflecting on my lineups. It's like half the week I'm doing that as well. And with these Denver players, I don't think we'll see again, hopefully not, knock on wood, but in the future, the projections for an entire team to take a massive jump down the way it did with the Broncos as soon as the news broke.
Right. Noah Fant he had the only reception. There was one reception by any Bronco, and his Noah Fant. And I got to say, Hinton, I thought he took that like a champ.
Man.
He was put in a terrible situation. I thought the play calling could have been a little bit better, maybe design something, just dump offs. They were having this kid throw it on the field, and I thought he did everything he could. And then I always laugh because people sit there and say, oh, I could complete X amount of passes. I don't think you could.
Yeah. When they're sitting behind the, it's that one GIF or GIF, however you say it, from the South Park episode with the guy behind the computer saying those things there. But yeah.
So I respect Hinton, and I love that he was in sales last month, and now all of a sudden he's quarterbacking an NFL team in the next month. He had barely any reps, 0 reps. I will say though, jokingly, he made Tim Tebow look like Peyton Manning. I mean, We missed Tebow that day, I will say.
That had to be funny if one of his buddies didn't catch the news right away and he just texted him, "Hey, check the Broncos game out on Sunday."
Ugh.
And then you tune in to see that. So
Yeah.
super interesting week with Denver there.
Yeah.
So we talked about Tyreek Hill earlier in the podcast here, having that massive, I think, 57-point week with Patrick Mahomes. So it seems like dynasty-wise. So I check dynasty rankings pretty often off of Fantasy Pros and sometimes on ESPN or some other sources, but it changes often, almost on a weekly basis, especially when it comes to the talk of Twitter. So Mahomes and Tyreek have this massive week, and now Tyreek, for a lot of people, is the dynasty wide receiver 1. Devontae Adams has a massive week, and Devontae Adams is the wide receiver 1. DK Metcalf's name's been thrown in that hat pretty often as well. And it's crazy to think that last year it seemed like Michael Thomas was the number 1 without any sort of debate. So what I have here is the top 10 according to Fantasy Pros that was updated today, December 1st. And here's how the rankings currently are for wide receivers in Dynasty. So 1, DK Metcalf they had. 2, Devontae Adams. 3, A.J. Brown. 4, Tyreek Hill. 5, DeAndre Hopkins. 6, CeeDee Lamb. 7, Michael Thomas. 8, Justin Jefferson. 9, Calvin Ridley. And then 10, Terry McLaurin. I also ran a poll, which we see too often on Twitter, but I got a decent amount of votes on there, 433 votes. I said, who is your dynasty wide receiver 1? And in comparison to Fantasy Pros, the consensus 42% wise was Devontae Adams. So maybe not a consensus, but the highest percentage was Devontae Adams. And then in second was Tyreek Hill, 34%, DK Metcalf, 21%. And again, funny stat here, Michael Thomas, 3% after looking at what we thought of him last year. So Fantasy Pros, Twitter talk. What about JB? Who do you have as your dynasty wide receiver 1? And I know it's going to change probably on a weekly basis, but we're talking December 1st, 2020.
It might change by the end of the show, Nick. Forget about later this week, later this month. But for me, it comes down to 2 players, and I wouldn't, I don't want to ride the fence here, but it's Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams, which is funny because you mentioned them. Devontae Adams, he's going to be 28 going into 2021, and it's going to be the last year of his deal. Do they keep him around at least until Aaron Rodgers' contract is up in 2023, even though there are some ways they could get out of that contract towards the tail end of it? And then Tyreek Hill, he is tied to the best quarterback and such an explosive offense. That's nothing groundbreaking. Tyreek Hill, he got that misnomer, I feel like, as a boom bust player. He's a lot more consistent than people want to admit. And his ceiling is, it competes with any other ceiling in the NFL. You want to talk about DK Metcalf, Devontae Adams. But for me, Devontae Adams, I just, the nice thing about him is you don't have to pay the wide receiver 1 price to acquire him. If I have Tyreek Hill, I think I can move him for Devontae Adams plus. If I have DK Metcalf and Nick, you're rebuilding, I think I could get Devontae Adams plus another win now piece that's going to help me contend and continue on my path to a championship this year. But yeah, for me, it's Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams. I know a lot of people are excited about DK Metcalf, but that offense, yes, it's pedal to the metal right now, and they're throwing the ball a ton, but are they going to stick with that? And my worry is that they regress back to what they've been doing the last few years, where it's a ground and pound type game. And then, A.J. Brown, he's been fantastic, but he's not there for me right now. I think, that offense does worry me a little bit just because of how reliant it is on Derrick Henry. And I don't want to say, regression for A.J. Brown, but he has been making a ton of big plays. And can we count on that over and over and over again? And the last few weeks we have been able to. I mean, he's returning onside kicks for touchdowns that are putting him up to like 30 points for the week. But yeah, going Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, those are the 2 guys I have battling it out for my dynasty wide receiver 1.
3 good analysts on Twitter, Triple Play Fantasy. Thank you guys. Awesome podcast right there. Yeah, there's a lot of different factors, and that's probably why it changes so often. We look at Devontae Adams and what he does on a weekly basis, even without having a good supporting cast of wide receivers with him on a consistent level, and we question, Aaron Rodgers is 36. What does his dynasty outlook look like in a few years from now? And then Tyreek Hill, some people question, hey, well, Travis Kelce sometimes is the number one target on that team. Does that take away from where his ceiling could be, even though we've just seen what his ceiling could be? And then DK, like you said, just said, JB, they go back to being the run heavy team they were in the past, and maybe Lockett gets a boost or somebody else gets a little bit more of some volume when the volume's not there. What does that mean? So there's so many questions in Dynasty, and it does change almost on a daily basis, if not hourly, like you said. Jacob, who's your guy?
Oh. Nick, real quick, and this always happens to me, and I apologize, guys, but as I throw my first take out there and somebody else starts to talk, my mind goes 1,000 miles a minute, and I'm like, oh yeah, I wanted to say that. But Devontae Adams, everybody wants to talk about age in Dynasty, and to an extent, yes, but I don't know about you guys. I can't predict 5 years down the road. I don't even know if we can predict 5 days down the road during 2020. But Devontae Adams, give me 3 wide receiver 1 years, 28, 29, 30. I'm okay with that. And he's traveling down the same path that we saw with Julio Jones' value, I think. And as long as Devontae Adams can avoid the concussions from here on out, give me him for 3 years. And I think people are so worried about age, and that's going to allow us to get Devontae Adams a little bit lower come these early offseason startups.
That's a good point. Good point. Jacob.
Man, I feel like I just took like a dynasty tutorial from you, John. I mean, like, I feel like I'm about to make like 3 trades after this. I liked all of your strategy and points. Now,
well, if they don't pan out, my DMs are closed for you. I don't need you coming after me, Jacob.
You can block me later. I will say it's funny because I'm about to go almost opposite of you, John. Just because I really like DK Metcalf. When I first saw this question, I thought you were baiting me into saying Tyreek Hill just because of his crazy game he just had. But I am never a prisoner of the moment. And it's funny, Twitter has this knack for being a prisoner of the moment. Like, any player that explodes is automatically number 1 in redrafts next year, number 1 in Dynasty. And, we need a bigger sample size. And in Dynasty, I don't think I've been doing it as long as you, John. I've been doing it probably for about 4 years now. And I got to say, the age is so I take age into account pretty heavily when I rank my Dynasty players. So DK Metcalf, what he's doing at 22 years old is insane. And he did have a few drops last night, apart from his 200-yard game. He did have a drop in the end zone that was kind of a head scratcher. He kind of bear hugged the football. I don't know. So he does have some head scratching moments, but he is 22 years old. He's 6'4". He runs a 4.3, and he is tied to Russell Wilson. And I get what you're saying, John, about how the Seahawks love to pound the ball, because they do. They've been pounding the ball for years, but the Seahawks defense hasn't been as bad as they've been in forever. I can't imagine a worse defense. Even though the Eagles made them look good last night, I think that speaks more to Carson Wentz than it does to the Seahawks' actual talent. So I'm going with DK Metcalf purely on what he's done at such a young age, and he's tied to a very good quarterback who's going to be there for as long as he wants to, which is huge for me. Like you said, it's hard to pick Adams just because Rodgers is 36, Adams is 28. I mean, he's going to be incredible for at least 2 to 3 years, but I just want that safety of knowing that I have this 22-year-old who's going to ball out for at least the next 6 to 7 years.
I like that because too often we go on podcasts and we all give the thumbs up to every single thing that everybody has to say. And I think we had some nice points crossover right there. And I took a stab at some dynasty rankings. I went a little crazy with the quarterback ones, Jacob. Me and you talked about that. But yeah,
Herbert, it was Herbert over Burrow, right?
Yeah, I did have him pretty high in the list.
I'm there with you. We like talked about this over, even before the Burrow injury. And I had Herbert, if we were ranking them at the time, and then even still now, it would be Herbert, Burrow, Tua. But I could see the flip between Burrow and Tua at this point, but Herbert above the other two without a doubt.
Yeah. And the wide receivers, I've been juggling the idea of them around a lot. I think I had, and I still have Adams 1 and Metcalf 2, and then Tyreek Hill 3. I think I was a lot higher on Calvin Ridley than other people were. But yeah, it's just wild in a dynasty, rankings perspective, how everything changes so often. And that's what I like about Fantasy Pros is, I don't agree with a lot that they say. I do agree with a lot that they say, but I do like the consistency of, hey, every week on a Monday, we're going to update the rankings. So that's awesome. That's the awesome thing about Dynasty. It's not set in stone. So speaking even further here on wide receiver stacks, I threw out the names Fuller and Cooks just because they both have had some very, very nice weeks. We're going to take them out of this discussion now because Will Fuller had the news that we discussed already break. Regardless if it was him taking medicine, like he said, or what he was actually doing. But I got two different stacks here. So let's say you're a fantasy manager and you have a stack of wide receivers in your lineup, which I personally don't have something like this, but could make a case for if you have a pair that's in the top 10, you're having a decent fantasy season. So here's my two stacks right now, and I'm going to give you their overall ranking for the year and then what they've been the last 3 weeks of football. So first one, we've been talking about DK a little bit here. He's the wide receiver 3 on the year. Tyler Lockett is the wide receiver 7 on the year. Over the past 3 games, Metcalf's been the wide receiver 14 and Lockett's been the wide receiver 22. On the other side, our choice is Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Mike Evans is the wide receiver 17. Chris Godwin is the wide receiver 33. Obviously missed some time. The last 3 games, though, Mike Evans is the wide receiver 6 to Chris Godwin being the wide receiver 10. So we look at it in 2 different ways. Season long, DK, Metcalf and Lockett look like the better pair. But over the last 3 games, Evans and Godwin look the better pair. Rest of the season. If you had to pick one stack, you had the choice. Who would it be and why? And we'll go with Jacob. We'll go with you on this one.
So I'm going to go with DK and Lockett all day. That's the fastest and most talented stack in the NFL, in my opinion. I don't see them both having a bad game on any given week. At least one of them is going to explode every week, if not both. If they both explode, oh my goodness, it's going to break Twitter. But I do, from a talent standpoint, Evans and Godwin, they are a monster duo. But I don't trust Brady to consistently feed them enough for them to be my stack pick. I'm going to go with the better quarterback in Russell Wilson with a worse defense in the Seahawks and go with Metcalf and Lockett.
All right. JB, are you in agreement or are we going to disagree here?
I think Jacob may have peeked at my notes here, but I'm also going to DK and Lockett. And this was super easy for me. Yeah. Like Jacob said, talent-wise, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, they're both phenomenal players. Nobody's questioning that. Right. But Tom Brady, especially with the way Gronkowski's been playing, the fact that he is still healthy and we're heading into week 13 amazes me because I did not think we would be there. But then the Antonio Brown signing, Fournette, being involved in the passing game, Ronald Jones being solid on the ground. I don't like the my chances there if I was forced to stack Godwin and Evans on a weekly basis throughout the rest of the season. For DK and Tyler Lockett, 5 of the last 6 weeks, at least one of them's put up a wide receiver 1 week, and 2 of those were the wide receiver 1 overall, and there was another top 5 week thrown in there too. So if you have DK and Lockett, you're pretty much guaranteed a 40-point combination, 50-point combination. Right. Yeah, you might look down and see a Tyler Lockett 5 points, but you're also getting DK at 35. So you're kind of minimizing your risk there by going with both options. Whereas if you go with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, Heck, it might not be either of them for one game. It might be Antonio Brown, Gronkowski. It might be the defense stepping up and then them really utilizing the run. So for me, this was an easy one. DK and Lockett. It actually would have been a little bit more difficult if Fuller and Cooks were still included, I think. But yeah, I'll go with the Seahawks.
Which I think was slept on. That's why I had them in the mix originally, because
I like that you included them,
right.
Yeah, you don't seem to put them on that same tier, but in reality, I mean, they were both pretty consistently both going off for some weeks. But I like the combination of points you guys made. Jacob, you mentioned one of them's going to go off, and that one guy going off might just win you a matchup. And then JB on the other side, talking about the Bucks, it's very diverse with who is getting what sort of touches, where their production's coming from. A little bit hard to predict with the Buccaneers core of weapons there. So going to the next question here, and again, just throwing out a mixture of questions: dynasty, redraft, current 2020, a little bit all over the place, but I like that just because keeps everybody entertained for the podcast here. But James Robinson, I have a soft spot for James Robinson because I live in a suburb of Illinois. He's from Rockford, Illinois. He went to Illinois State, same college my wife did actually. And he's balling out this season. The RB4 on the year. He has an average of 18.3 points, 890 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns total. He's had weeks where he scored 21, 30.9, 31.7, 26.9 last week. The volume is insane for James Robinson. 27 touches last game. He's had 25 plus touches in 4 out of 5 of the last game. So you can count on him getting involved in the passing game, a ton of carries on a consistent level. The asterisk moving forward, maybe for some people, and I saw a lot of debate about this. We got a quick comment here. Chris checking in. What's up, Chris?
Evening.
So one thing that I saw that has been brought up with James Robinson, though, is his fantasy playoff schedule. So weeks 14, 15, and 16, he draws Tennessee, Baltimore, and Chicago. And I had to say Chicago like a true Chicagoan there. Chicago. No, Chicago. But yeah, so he's been very good in fantasy. The volume is insane. Do you have any sort of thoughts about potentially benching him if you have the availability to do so due to the matchups in the fantasy playoffs here? And JB, we can start with you on this one.
James Robinson will be nowhere near my bench. He is going to be in my starting lineup. Like you said, for the last 5 games, at least 25 touches, 17 rushing attempts, at least 17 rushing attempts in each of the last 5 games. And Jacksonville, they're a funny team because it doesn't matter what the score is. They're still willing to run the ball. And people were knocking him. Well, Blaine Gabbert, coming in. Was it Blaine Gabbert? I don't even know who the heck came in for them.
What the last game, Glennon?
Glennon. I'm saying Blaine Gabbert here. I don't know where the heck I pulled that from.
They all just mold into one quarterback.
Yeah, seriously. So Glennon, they're going to give James Robinson the ball at least 4 targets in 8 games this season. And I think we saw his floor against the Pittsburgh Steelers where he still managed 10 PPR points. He's been finding the end zone occasionally, but he really hasn't been, making his hay there in the end zone where you look at a lot of players and they have to get in the end zone. I'll take 10 points out of James Robinson. And I know on paper, the scary matchup is that Baltimore Ravens defense. They gave up over 120 yards to Damian Harris and Derrick Henry in back-to-back weeks. I am not as worried as other people are going to be. So James Robinson, like I said, nowhere near my bench. I am starting him without a doubt. And
we have a great comment from I-80 Sports Bob. Got to dance with the girl who brought you there, which is
love that. Love
fact.
That commitment.
Jacob, do you think twice about benching James Robinson due to these matchups?
I absolutely do not. I mean, I was scared, though, when John was like, he's nowhere near. I was like,
did you like that?
Okay.
I did that on purpose.
Nice. Woo. You got me. Yeah, I just, like you said, that Steelers game where they're getting blown out, he still gets 10 points in PPR leagues. I mean, he still was a low-end RB2, even though that was the most negative game script of the whole week. I mean, he is an unbelievable talent, and I don't know where. So Nick just educated me on where he came from. I was like, where did this guy come from? He came from Illinois State. I mean, Where is Ryquell Armstead? I mean, does anyone know where that guy is? Is he okay?
Something weird was going on with that because he had COVID, but I think
Right.
he dealt with some complications with COVID. So
Okay.
I don't know what was the complications. I haven't heard anything. I don't know if John, if you've heard anything about that.
I saw the one tweet, and I don't know if it was like a retweet from Field Yates a few weeks back, but it sounded like he went to the hospital at least once, maybe twice, just like you said, Nick,
Okay.
because of the complications. But yeah, there was a stretch nobody knew a thing about what was going on.
Right. So so James Robinson was really forced into the starting lineup as an undrafted free agent, and he's been balling out. I mean, at his past, or if you look at his last 5 games, he's averaging 22 carries, over 100 yards. And he's averaging 4.2 targets. Like Nick was saying, he's in the passing game too, for a total of 73 yards. And like you said, he just has an incredible floor on an awful team. And I'm taking volume all day over like a possible boom or bust running back option. I mean, you're starting J-Rob.
Yeah, I threw this one in there just because, we all have a diverse group of people that listen to us on a weekly basis. And I know the 3 of us would never sit a stud, right? But some people do look at fantasy matchups, and I think you have to avoid getting cute sometimes with these things and say, hey, well, James Robinson's playing Baltimore. I know he struggled a little bit against Pittsburgh back when he played them. Maybe I bench him for, I don't know, a guy who's been very good lately, like a Wayne Gallman, who I threw on this list here. But I think the point we're all getting at is you don't sit your studs. If the volume's there, it's crucial. I don't think a lot of running backs have that sort of volume. I think we could probably write off maybe a handful off the top of our head that on a weekly basis we can count on getting 25 touches, which is insane to have. Another question. So that's actually a question I saw on Twitter, not directed to me, just floating around there. Another question I saw on Twitter is Travis Kelce the 2020 fantasy MVP? And I didn't really get the question at first, but then when I looked at the explanation of why this question was being asked, we look at Travis Kelce at the tight end position. That's been a bit of a struggle this year. Obviously, George Kittle being injured and out. And then we have a lot of other guys that have super hot, super cold weeks and don't really score a ton. He's the tight end 1 right now, and his average is 19.3 points. He has 212 total points on the year. The tight end 2 has 146. The tight end 3 has 130. So the point being here is that Travis Kelce, the points he produces is such a huge gap between the next tier and the next tier and the next tier of fantasy tight ends. Does that, for you guys, make him the fantasy tight end just because of how far away he is in the position compared to others? And before we get you guys into this, we got Dave Toronto. I swear Kelce would be a top 5 wide receiver, and that'd be a good stat to look at where he would be for the position. But JB, we'll start with you on this. Is this a good question?
I love this question. We actually talked about this after week 8 on Fantasy Football Confidential. We did the midseason MVP, and that was one of the awards that we gave out. And my guy was Travis Kelce. Nice. The advantage that you have in the value over replacement, you can't make up those points throughout the rest of your lineup. It is a set it and forget it. One of the very few players that are like that. He is averaging at least over 6 points per game more than tight end 2. There is no other, and not just a tight end 2, the tight end 2. There is no other position like that. If you look across the board, Alvin Kamara, even though, there's some things going on there in New Orleans, Kamara and Cook, Tyreek and Adams, Kyler, Mahomes, Rush, Josh Allen, all those guys, there are other viable options that you don't have to make up the ground there. But 6 points over the tight end 2 is such a drastic difference. And I tweeted out after this week's game, I said, yes, everybody's talking about Tyreek Hill and Patrick Mahomes, and fantasy managers might have been disappointed that Travis Kelce put up 8 for 80 with no touchdowns, but that is the luxury and what fantasy managers that have Travis Kelce in the roster have become accustomed to here. That we're spoiled by Travis Kelce, and he is absolutely, without a doubt, my fantasy MVP. He's missed one game since 2014.
Right.
He is reliable. Now, I probably shouldn't have said that. I'll knock on wood somewhere. But,
I got you.
Right.
I'm coming after you, John.
I just think he's so reliable. He's somebody that is one of the, looking at this 2020 season where things have been so wild, he is one piece of consistency that we can look to. And yeah, he's my fantasy MVP this season.
So you mentioned before how much of an advantage it is when Taysom Hill was the talk of Twitter and fantasy, because you can plug him into the tight end position. It was almost disrespectful to Travis Kelce because he has produced that sort of way this whole year. Jacob, is that something you can buy into, or are you a little bit on the other side of that?
What's funny is that Kelce outscored Hill still. He was still the number one ranked tight end that week, which I loved. But, I can't argue with that. Kelce is the fantasy MVP. Now, before George Kittle went down, you could lump both those studs together and say they were both the MVPs because of what you guys have been saying. There's a huge drop off between the two, but Kelce has stayed. Kelce has stayed healthy, which is a huge advantage over Kittle. So I am very much a guy who is just, you're going to draft running back in the first 2 rounds. Don't even think about going anywhere else. I'm just like, set those 2 guys, and then you can build your team around them. And I've been like that for at least 10 years now. But I am slowly starting to change that, considering how awful tight ends have been this year. I mean, awful. I mean, it is so hard for me to hit on my streaming articles with all of like the tight end volatility. I mean, I'm probably half. It's been an awful year for tight ends. So much so that I wouldn't mind taking Kelce late first to early second if I have a stud RB. I won't relent on that. You need your stud RB1, but Kelce I would take over an RB2, a middling RB1 too. Yeah,
and I thought Darren Waller was going to be a little bit closer to even pushing towards that tier, but man, we've saw some iffy weeks for him as well. I don't want to get too into it, but Derek Carr was my surprise of the week just because the matchup was so nice, and his ceiling is not as bad as people think, and he's got this great completion percentage. But 6.3 out of Darren Waller this past week. He's had a few games where he's under like 8 points, so he's nowhere near that tier of Kelce. So there is a huge gap between Kelce and any other tight end fantasy that's healthy right now, which is crazy. So next on the list, we're talking about guys that lead the position. Alvin Kamara, week 11 here, 13 for 45 and a touchdown. He had 0 catches. Week 12, 11 for 54, 1 catch for -2 yards. He's had 8 games with 5+ catches, and he's had 3 games of 9+ with a 13 catch game in that mix there, week 3 against Green Bay. So we're used to Kamara being almost like a wide receiver in the league. Taysom Hill, does he kill Kamara's value moving forward while he's a starter? Jacob, we can start with you on this one.
Yes, 100%. I thought that week 11 was just an anomaly with Alvin Kamara going absolutely catchless, but he was only targeted twice last game, and that was for -2 yards. So for me, Alvin Kamara is absolutely going to be ranked outside of my top 5 every week as long as Hill is starting there.
JB, you're in the same boat, or do you have some optimism for Kamara?
No, I think it's pretty clear at this point. The biggest concern for me, he goes from a 26% target share to a 9% target share with Taysom Hill. And it's not just the 9% target share, but now we're also seeing fewer pass attempts. And Taysom Hill, if you have him for fantasy purposes, fine. Especially in super flex leagues, if you're one of those people on ESPN that refuse to change your lineup just so you can play Taysom Hill tight end, and I think that's garbage, by the way, but if you're doing that, whatever. But, it's the targets. Like you said, Nick, we are seeing wide receiver production. We finally were going to see a season where he demolished that 81 receptions because he hit it 3 years in a row, exactly 81 receptions. And, how is this season going to end for Alvin Kamara? Unfortunately, in redraft leagues and some dynasty leagues, you're past your trade deadline. So you're stuck with him at this point. It's going to be very difficult. If I'm choosing between Alvin Kamara and I picked up James Robinson off of waivers early in the season, I'm going James Robinson. And like you said, Jacob, until Taysom Hill either shows the willingness to get him involved in the passing game or he's no longer the quarterback, I can't count on Alvin Kamara. The rushing attempts, they're pretty flat from Drew Brees to Taysom Hill, about 12 per game. But you see these running quarterbacks, and sometimes they minimize the running backs in the passing game. We see in Baltimore to an extent, obviously with Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen to an extent in Buffalo, but we're seeing it now with Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara. Dynasty, if your trade deadline hasn't passed, you're probably going to hold unless you can make a lateral type move, maybe a little bit of a downgrade longer term. But if you're a contender, maybe that makes sense for you. But there's nothing to be excited about here as long as Taysom Hill is behind center.
Yeah, I was listening to Field Yates. I know he's on your show, JB, before the season started, which was awesome. But I listen to their show all the time. And a point he brought up, an idea that I thought about a little bit is with other quarterbacks in the league, like Drew Brees, for instance, sometimes when he's looking for the bigger play downfield or maybe across the middle and it breaks down, it doesn't work out, he can easily audible to Kamara out of the backfield and find him. Whereas maybe a Taysom Hill tier sort of quarterback doesn't really have the confidence and ability to do that. And I wondered if maybe that's a factor where he doesn't see option 1 or 2, so then he can find Kamara out of the backfield, and he's just not at that comfort level to do that. Maybe I'm way off on this, but that was an idea I thought was interesting.
No, I think it's spot on too, because then, like I said, the mobile quarterbacks, if the first option's not there, the second option might not be there, they take off.
Right.
Exactly, Jacob. They take off. So now you're limiting the running backs in the passing game. And I see Dave's comment, Latavius Murray might be a decent start now too. I would just be a little hesitant because they did just go against the Denver Broncos, who didn't have a quarterback, and they were able to run. And I think I thought I saw Alvin Kamara might have been a little bit banged up. I would like to see more information on that. But yeah, if you're in a deeper league, Latavius Murray, fire him up. But I would, temper expectations a little bit there personally.
Right.
And last part of this, with Taysom Hill still under center, is Kamara a must start?
Oh, you have to start him. I think you do, just because, what better option do you have? It's like, I'm not going to.
James Robinson.
What's that?
James Robinson.
Oh, well, if you have James Robinson, I will. Okay, sure. It's really hard if you have two running backs and a flex. It's like, I can't justify benching some guy who's definitely going to get 15 plus touches, and he has the talent to overcome, which is nice to know.
Yeah, I think it's just a very team dependent question. I mean, what does your outlook of your team look like? I know in some leagues I'm very, very deep and I can audible on a weekly basis. In other leagues, if one guy is a little bit banged up, I might have a rough go. Team dependent. I got 2 quick questions here, and then we'll wrap things up because we're about to hit that hour mark here. So maybe we can fly through these last 2. So Cam Akers, does he escape the committee? Last week, he had 9 carries for 84 yards and a touchdown. He had a big 67-yard play. Brown and Henderson combined for 13 carries for 23 yards. Do you think red flashing lights were going off in McVay's head after having a decent game out of Cam Akers that he can escape out of this committee? Or are we still going to have this outlook that the Rams are just going to go with the hot hand at the time? JB, what's your quick thoughts here on Cam Akers still in a committee, or does he escape it?
For the remainder of this year, I think he's going to remain in a committee. Sean McVay, he's still one of those coaches, and you see this get thrown around a lot, that he is concerned with his running backs and pass protection, especially with that offensive line. At times, it's a little bit shaky, that Cam Akers, he doesn't exactly trust him. So I think he's still going to be in a committee, but also just the way this offense operates. One day it's Robert Woods, next week it's Cooper Kupp, 1 week it's Malcolm Brown, 1 week it might be Cam Akers. But yeah, I think it's going to be very tough to predict on a weekly basis.
Jacob, agreement?
Yeah. I've been hoping for weeks that Cam Akers would take the reins, but apparently McVay still loves Darrell Henderson and his 10 carries for 19 yards. I mean, I don't know what it's going to take for Akers to finally take the reins, but like you said, John, it's not going to happen this year.
Last running back question here, since we're talking about committees and situations that happen in a backfield. Maybe not the sexiest topic, but Wayne Gallman, RB6 weeks 7 through 12, and there's a bye week in there. He was the RB3 from week 7 through 10 before the bye. He's had games of 16.4, 13.2, 14.7, and then his last two, 19 and 18.1. Maybe a two-part question. When Freeman comes back, is it still Gallman's job? And then moving forward, did he just have a hot streak, or do we actually buy him being a good play the rest of the season here? And we can start with Jacob, and maybe just your quick thoughts on Wayne Gallman here.
Yeah, that's just a backfield I'm going to avoid entirely once Freeman's back. I mean, all of Gallman's success, is because Freeman's been hurt. Now, once Freeman comes back, they're going to split touches, and a Giants running back room that's splitting touches is not anywhere that I want to be in.
JB?
And yeah, I'm on board there. And, since Freeman's been out, Gallman's been averaging 1 touchdown per game. It sounds like Daniel Jones might be missing some time here. Is that going to be, is that touchdown upside that is carrying Wayne Gallman's value, unlike James Robinson, who we talked about earlier, is it going to be there? I don't think so, but I do think it's going to be a split between Gallman and Freeman, maybe 60-40 for Gallman, but still, even with Freeman out, he wasn't involved in the passing game that much. So yeah, he's a nice depth piece, but there is that concern now, more because Daniel Jones is out, but also a little bit because Devontae Freeman coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Good points there, guys. We're going to wrap things up just because we're at the hour mark, just over it. But again, this was a very all over the place sort of show, but I thought it was kind of fun that way. So many things to talk about when it comes to fantasy football, dynasty, redraft, the rest of the season here. And it seems like, again, like I said earlier in the podcast, I get nervous when my phone goes off because I don't know if it's good news, bad news, someone sick, some sort of protocol, or what the case is. But it's just been a crazy year. But again, I appreciate both of you guys coming on the show here. Part of the reason I did just fire off all those questions is because when you have two guys this smart, I got to pick their brain a little bit. So thank you guys again for coming on. And we'll start with JB. Give us a reminder where we can find you, what you got coming up here too.
This always happens when I do a guest spot. And Nick, Jacob, I apologize because there were some fantastic questions that we didn't get to, but God knows I talk and talk and talk. Yeah, I could talk.
I like it.
Love it.
But I do apologize for being long-winded at times. But yeah, find me on Twitter at the Bauer Club, Dynasty Theory at Dynasty Theory FF on Twitter and Instagram, and then Fantasy Football Confidential at FF_confidential, both on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the Dynasty Theory Patreon. Even, if your interest is a little bit piqued, come check it out. See if there's anything that interests you. A lot of great content and things will be rolling out there. But again, Nick, thank you so much for having me.
No problem at all. And have John popping in. JB long-winded with big eyes there. Jacob, give us the lowdown where we can find you, what you got going on and coming up here.
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter at Ain't Done Yet, and done is spelled DUNNE. Follow me for some weekly streamers, game previews, and all the rankings you need. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me on, Nick. I had a blast talking fantasy with you gentlemen.
All right, and thanks to everybody that tuned in to watch us live. This will be out on iTunes and Apple and all that. That's the same thing, but all sort of other ways to view this episode. And I'll be in touch with you too. And thanks again for coming on, guys.
Absolutely.